Hey, have you ever wondered why some podcasts just hook you right away, while others make you go, I wonder what else is playing in this feed? Well, today I'm uncovering the secrets behind some of the most compelling podcast intros. You're going to love this, so stay tuned. And also, wait for it, stay with me till the end of the show, and I'm going to share my top insider secret on how to instantly double your listener retention with one simple technique that the pros use but rarely talk about. So stay tuned.
Welcome to Launch It, the Podcast Maestro, your gateway to becoming a thought leader in your field. Dive into the world of elite podcasting and master the art of influence and inspiration. And now, podcast personality, award-winning author and actress, Anne Scottlin.
Welcome to Launch It, the Podcast Maestro. I'm Anne Scottlin, and today I'm diving into a critical element of your podcast success, and that is crafting the ultimate hook, line, and sinker. I don't know if you ever went fishing or if you love fishing or if you've ever gone fishing. I went fishing with my uncle one time. He was like such a great fisherman, and he showed me all the pieces of everything and the hook and the line. I was like, well, what's the sinker? Doesn't that sink the fish? I was like 4. No, this is what holds you solid. It's what brings the deal home, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today is how can you craft that perfect hook, line, and sinker to captivate your audience from the very first second, to keep them engaged? And I call it sticking power. It's this verbal Velcro that keeps your listeners listening. Well, who else was I talking to recently who was reminding me of a quote by, I know, it was a friend of mine, reminded me of a quote by John Lee Dumas. It says, a strong opening is your podcast handshake with the listener. A strong opening is your podcast handshake with the listener. So make it count. So what is the hook? Hook, line, and sinker. Well, before I do that and jump in, please be sure to like and subscribe and share this link, whether I'm streaming live still or you're sharing it afterwards with someone else who really should have a podcast or has one or is deciding to have one. And let's share with them the fun we're having here today. So the hook is that opening segment of your podcast. It's usually the first 30 seconds to 1 minute, right, of the episode, the very first words you say. Today, I used a hook for you, and it was, do you remember now? It actually had 2 parts. One was, have you ever wondered why some podcasts hook you right away, others make you click? And I'm going to share some secrets of that. And I had a kind of secondary hook, which was stay with me till the end of the show. And I'm going to give you one of my top secrets on how to double your listener retention. So these are examples of why you're probably still listening or watching at the moment, which is just kind of fun illustration to use, right? So you want them to keep listening. Those first impressions really matter. One, and this is where I talk about all the time, are you a world-class show or are you just a show for fun? It's, you can have a large following and just have a fun, trippy show. That's amazing, right? But if you really are, if you're delivering a message that you want to be taken seriously, that's the result of your career of work and study and practice and education and experience, and you want people to understand that you have a voice that matters, then having that world-class impression is important, and that's why you want to keep them listening, right? And it reduces listener abandonment. That's what they call it. Isn't it such a horrible sounding thing? Listener abandonment rates. It's like, oh my God, it sounds terrible. So that's just how many people click out after the first little bit and decide they're done and they're going to see what else is playing. So you really want to establish your value right away. You want to show your audience, hey, I'm bringing something valuable up very soon, again, at the end. And you definitely want to stay engaged right here from the start of this episode. And don't go away. You hear that on all the shows, right? Don't go away. So when you talk about hooks, one of the things we used to do in Hollywood was, and this is a business tactic, but we were using it in Hollywood as actors, which was, how do you have your 30-second elevator pitch? What if you end up in an elevator with a huge star, or better yet, a huge director, and you have 30 seconds to make an impression? What are you going to say? And we would play with this all the time. And there's two parts. I'm going to tell you two parts, and it's the same in your podcast. One, be prepared. So have your outline, have your comment, have your hook ready, well thought out. It's ready to go. And then also think on your feet. Don't be trapped by the bullet point itself. Be sure that you can ad lib to that, get comfortable in there, make an impression, like what's going on in the day today in the news, or what's going on with you personally, or what relates to a story you're going to share in a minute, or what's something that someone has wrote in about recently, asking a question that fits right in. Find those ways to click them together, and it's really going to make that impression stick. So it's not an elevator pitch, but here on the podcast, it's just going to be your hook. And I think it was Edson research showed that 22% of podcast listeners leave your podcast after 5 minutes if it doesn't engage them. What's engagement? Well, I think we did a whole episode on engagement, and we'll do a lot more. And most of you already know what that means. But how do you keep them engaged? Why do they feel like staying? That is my definition of engagement. Very simple. What makes them want to stay? A lot of people try to compel listeners to stay, and there is a difference, but then let me articulate that. Okay, I love dogs, as you know. If you've ever worked with dogs, puppies, training dogs, there's two ways to do it, right? One is a little bit old school, very old school, which is punishing them every time they do something wrong. That's one extreme. And the other extreme is only giving them motivation to get something they want because they want it, offering the treat to get them to sit instead of you spanking them if they don't sit, right? Ooh. So it's really the same with people, right? How are you keeping them? Are you keeping them engaged? Are you trying to force them to stay on my show, or you're going to miss out? There's like people who use that fear factor sort of, but more like, ooh, what am I going to get? Everyone wants to get something. They want to get something free. They want to get something that no one else knows. They want insider information. So creating your podcast to keep them beyond that first 5 minutes with a hook is super useful. And what are some techniques? Okay, well, here's a couple techniques that would be helpful in your creating your hook, right? Use intriguing questions. That's one way. Now, it could be if you're a solo host like I am today, those could be rhetorical questions, obviously. But if you also have a guest, you can address it to the guest, which I am co-host on another show, right? So I could say, Dr. Lyman Montgomery, what do you use for hooks on your show? And what have you found to be the most effective? Would you share that with us later in this episode? Oh, yeah, I'd love to do that. So using questions in any way to catch their attention. A powerful quote can be really useful to just keep them engaged. Something that's like, oh, wow, that really lands. I want to hear more. I talk about Guy Raz all the time in his show, How I Built This. And he always starts with that dramatic, pivotal moment in the entrepreneur's story, right? My bank account was empty. My wife had left me. My husband had left me. And I was so far behind in the mortgage. I was facing foreclosure. And then, so whatever that happens to be, right? So, but using that as a tool is a really good way to keep people's attention because it's a story. If I haven't said that enough, I will continue to say it. It was literally the second episode I ever did in the show about storytelling on your podcast. So important. Keep telling stories, keep people engaged, and just reworking your hook a little bit. It doesn't always have to be the same. In fact, it shouldn't be. You can use a similar formula, but it should change every episode. And some shows have shown that when they created a winning formula with their hook, they were able to increase their listeners by 50%, I think, just by reworking their opening hook. So this shows you how really important, powerful, and important it is. Okay, we're going to jump into the middle before our break. So the line. So we did the hook. We did the line. We haven't done the line. Stay tuned for that. Okay. So what is the line? It's building the connection, right? It's the connection between the fish and the fisherman. Building that connection. How does you keep the listener's interest once you've hooked them? So they're there. They lasted to minute 6. How do you keep it engaging and personal and vulnerable and Stories. I will never stop saying that enough. And also just, maintaining a coherent narrative, right? Have a strong narrative structure, have an outline. In my workshops and with my clients, I use my own particular formula for podcasting that gets the best results. So there's a way you can create this and keep it similar and repeating a pattern over and over. A strong narrative, that means that you're really clear about what you're presenting that day. And people know you're not just wander. Have you been? Okay, I was listening to a podcast yesterday on my way home in the car. And it just meandered. I won't say which one. It meandered all over the place. It was funny and I was hooked. And then one of the guests started wandering off in a completely unrelated direction. And then it's like they forgot the point of the show. And then the sidetrack was way more interesting than the subject matter of the show. Have you ever had that happen? I have had that happen. And I was just like, I don't have time to follow this meandering. Who knows where we're going to finally end up. And if it's a live stream, you can't really fast forward yet. So I'll come back and listen to it another time. I say, chances are pretty low that's going to happen, even though I might have the best intentions, right? Relate to that. They lost me because the narrative structure wasn't strong. You don't have to be so structured that it's awkward and uncomfortable and makes people like, I don't want to listen to that. But it has to feel like it's going somewhere and that you're making progress and that there's still a carrot at the end, right? So shows that have a strong narrative structure usually see 35% higher completion rate, as in completed the whole episode, because some people do actually complete the whole episode. A lot of new podcasters think everyone completes the episode. That is not true. But your completion rate is a huge example of how well your show is performing. I think that was from PodTrack where I found that statistic. So lastly, right before our break, what are some techniques that you can use with the line, the hook, the line? How do you keep that listener, that viewer hooked? Crafting that compelling storyline is always critical, and having that logical progression. In this, we've already talked about that, so I'm not going to go on and on. But here's a good example: Ashley Flowers from The Crime Junkie. Love her. She maintains suspense and curiosity through well-placed cliffhangers all the way through the show. You can feel the tension mounting, but then there's an interim and you have to wait, and then you feel the tension mounting, but you don't get full satisfaction or answers yet, and you have to wait. So she can't, that's what we call keeping you on the edge of your seat, basically, right? So if you haven't checked it out, go check out Ashley's show, Crime Junkie. So fun. I'm such a sucker for crime stories, crime solving stories. And lastly, use of personal anecdotes. Stories are great, but personal stories are always even better to really build a connection with your audience. Think of Tim Ferriss. He does this all the time on his show. So keeping it personal, keeping it relatable, keeping yourself engaged with the audience where they feel like they have a sneak peek into you and into your own life. All right. So I will be back with the story in just a minute. But first, stick around. We're going to take a break. And while we are at break, please do like, subscribe, comment, send me your comments and questions. I would love to hear from you. Always love answering your questions on the show. We'll be back in just a minute with The Sinker.
Picture this. You have worked your whole life to become an expert, a leader, a change maker, but you're so busy, most people will never discover you to recognize your work. Anne Scottlin, founder of Podcast Maestro, understands this challenge. With a decade of Hollywood experience and a proven track record as a business coach, Anne turns seasoned professionals into thought leaders through the art of podcasting. Podcast Maestro offers plug-and-play services, handling everything from pre-production to distribution, so you can focus on your message while Anne and her team manage the rest. Leverage Anne's Hollywood production knowledge, strategic business insight, and social media expertise to amplify your reach and impact. If you're ready to elevate your voice, connect with Anne Scottlin at Podcast Maestro and begin your podcast journey today.
Welcome back to Launching the Podcast Maestro. I'm Anne Scottlin. This is the second half of our show. Today we are talking about how to make your podcast really stand out as a world-class show by having a predetermined hook line, and sinker in your format. And when you formulate each show, we've already talked about the hook and the line, and now we're going to drop in to the sinker. I don't know. That was so nerdy, but I couldn't help it. All right. And I was promising you a story. So the sinker is what seals the deal, right? That's basically what seals the deal. And I can think of, or going the extra mile sometimes is the sinker. Thinking outside the box is often the sinker. When I was an actress in Hollywood, there was a feature film I wanted to be a lead in. I was with a Persian director and crew, and they were doing a humanitarian story about Iran in the 1979-1980 revolution. And I was auditioning for an investigative reporter. And we were going to be filming in the US and in Paris and around France. And it was going to be a really fabulous opportunity. But the reporter was supposed to be at least half Persian for the purposes of the story. Well, as you can tell, I'm not half Persian, although I would love to have their eyelashes. No, so I auditioned, and I could tell my audition was really strong. But I could also tell that the director was like, he could just like, I could actually see that he was torn a little bit, because I knew my audition was really strong, but that I wasn't quite what he had in mind. So I decided to seal the deal, or try to seal the deal. And my sinker, my decision to do that was, I did the unheard of, which wasn't just waiting for my agent and manager to negotiate with him. I did send it through them, to be fair, but I sat down and typed a 4-page proposal to him of why I was the right choice for this feature film. I wrote how I had an interesting past that made me especially passionate about women's rights, including in the Middle East, but women's rights everywhere. I had a real interest in history and controlling societies. I had been doing humanitarian work with Amnesty International and other humanitarian organizations for years. And I had just a lot of personal motivation and history associated with the kind of topic that this movie was going to cover. I just laid it all out because there was literally nothing left to do. And I'm like, I'm just going to lay it all out. And he probably won't bite, but wow, what if he did, right? So I went way overboard. And I sent it off to him via my agent and waited a couple of weeks at least. And then I got a message, "You got the job," was the message. And I was like, you're absolutely kidding me. How is that possible? I know I wasn't, I didn't look the exact right part for the story. But for this director who had lost family members in that revolution, his wife, his sons, having someone who was not just there to act and make a dollar, but someone who was absolutely committed and passionate to the humanitarian principles behind the story, that was worth it. So even though that's not a podcast story per se, that's just an example of sealing the deal. What is the sinker? What was the little bit that just pushes your audience to take that action step that you want them to take? What is the little bit of push that they need? You want to formulate that right into your outline. So what are some of the things you can do to kind of get them there? Well, you can summarize the key points, like and leave them with a thought-provoking question. That can be a CTA, call to action, where there's a specific, please go do this, or if you really would like to discover this, do this. If you want more information, go here. If you'd like to get a free copy of my workbook, go here. If you would like to, whatever that is, what is the action you really want them to take? And, there's a really good example as well here from Dax Shepard who's the Armchair Expert podcast, right? And how he ties up his episodes with those reflective thoughts and takeaways. You just kind of go, you hear it end and you're still thinking about it even after the episode has stopped. Well, that's perfect, right? Because if you can keep them engaged after they've stopped watching or listening, you're really, really winning. And you can increase your listener retention by up to, I think 40% just through having strong, improved episode conclusions that include a nice transition and a strong call to action. So we have looked at the hook, the line, the sinker for your podcast. How do you start building a formula for a world-class podcast that's going to help make you a thought leader in your field? Picture this. You've spent your career becoming a master of your trade, whether you work for yourself, whether you work for someone else. You've still been working really hard. You've been educated. You have experience. You have wisdom. You have so much to contribute. You have a legacy to share now, not just leave behind. So if you have been thinking about having a podcast, if you have been thinking about marketing your book, if you've been thinking about the idea of sharing your value with the world beyond your just everyday workplace, then this is something you might really want to consider. Jumping into a podcast of your own that really can make an impression. So think about using your hook, line, and sinker and have that formula in every single episode. And I promised you, wait for it, the wait for it answer, right? Which was, if you stayed with me to the end of this episode, thank you so much. As promised, so here's my top insider secret to double your listener retention. So we're running out of time, so I'm going to be quick. So if you have a pencil or keep this link. So here's a secret. You may not have even heard of this before, or if you're an experienced podcaster, you know. But if you want to double your listener retention, what we're going to talk about is strategic mid-roll callbacks. That would be a fun game. No. Actually would. Okay, strategic mid-roll callbacks. So no, this is not callbacks for the acting job. Yeah. So this is the technique that basically involves referencing key points or those cliffhangers that we talked about earlier. Cliffhangers you set up earlier in your episode, referencing them during the middle segment. So in this episode, it would have been under line, right? So we had hook, we had line, we had sinker. So in the middle segment, you want to use these references to earlier cliffhangers. So what does that mean? So as you're planning your episode, you want to pinpoint those most engaging points or cliffhangers from the first half, and then you want to seamlessly integrate those. So identify your key moments and integrate them around the halfway mark of your show. You want to briefly revisit those key moments or cliffhangers, because it doesn't only just reinforce the importance of these points, but it also re-engages your listeners who might be like, this is good. And, oh, is that a milkshake sign over there? Oh, wait, what? Yes, I want to hear the end of the story, right? So, and then third, create anticipation. Use phrases like, remember what I mentioned earlier about intriguing point, right? Or we're just about to dive deeper into that. You all hear me say this kind of thing all the time, right? Or in a few moments, we're going to come back and reveal that surprising twist that's related to the earlier story about when I was mountain climbing, right? So that is your answer to the wait for it that I promised you. Strategic mid-roll callbacks. I talk a whole lot more about that in my workshops or when I'm doing consulting. If you want to know more on that or any topic, you can join me on one of my workshops. Check out my website, annescottlin.com. If you want just a professional consulting session, let's chat. I would love to do that. Or my favorite, let me and my team do it all for you. Roll out the red carpet for your podcast. The dream, really the dream, if only I'd had this, a plug and play world-class podcast production. We cover everything from A to Z. And when I say A to Z, I mean, even if you don't even know what topic you're going to talk about yet in the whole show or just for that week, A to Z, to posting everything on your social media for you. You've never heard the like. Okay, so that is my call to action. Jump on over to my website, annescottlin.com, and let's see what I can do for you. And over the next couple weeks, also be watching for some freebies I'm going to be posting on the site for you. So next time in this series, the Podcast Power Playbook, a very popular topic. I'm going to talk about data-driven podcasting. What is that? It's basically using analytics to grow your show. This is so relevant. It is so time appropriate. I can't wait to have this discussion, and send me your questions about analytics and data and how to grow your show, and I will try to answer them on that episode. Thank you so much for joining me here on Launch It, the Podcast Maestro. And please subscribe, leave me a review, share this episode. Mostly, please share it with fellow podcasters who are aiming for a world-class production. So until next time, keep crafting those hooks, lines, and sinkers. We'll see you next time. Wednesdays streaming at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern, and 5 p.m. GMT. See you soon. Bye.